If anyone had told Luca Fontaine that his Tuesday night would involve publicly humiliating the most dangerous man in the city, accidentally throwing shrimp cocktail on a senator, and discovering his fated mate, all within the span of 45 minutes, he would have laughed so hard his hearing aids would have rattled. Well, if he'd been wearing them, which he wasn't, because they were currently sitting in a bowl of rice on his kitchen counter after an unfortunate incident involving his roommate's cat, a bathtub, and what Luca could only describe as the worst game of fetch in recorded history. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Luca Fontaine was a 24-year-old Omega with honey-brown curls, wide hazel eyes that his grandmother described as the eyes of a Disney prince who's been lightly electrocuted, and a smile that could melt glaciers. He'd been deaf since birth, and he navigated the hearing world with a combination of lip-reading skills, sign language, sheer stubbornness, and an almost supernatural ability to get himself into situations that would make a guardian angel file for early retirement. Tonight, he was attending the Castellano Foundation charity gala because his best friend, Maya, had begged him. She was a journalist trying to get close to the event's mysterious host for an interview, and she needed a +1 who looked pretty and wouldn't cause trouble. Luca had taken offense at the second part. He should have taken it as a prophecy. The gala was held at the Obsidian Grand Hotel, a towering monument to wealth and questionable interior design choices. Everything was black marble and gold fixtures, like someone had given a Gothic vampire an unlimited budget and a subscription to Architectural Digest. Luca tugged at his borrowed suit jacket, Maya's brothers, 2 sizes too big in the shoulders, and tried to look like he belonged among the glittering crowd of politicians, socialites, and people whose watches cost more than his college education. "Remember," Maya signed to him as they entered, her fingers quick and precise. "Just smile, eat the free food, and don't touch anything." "You make me sound like a golden retriever," Luca signed back. "If the shoe fits." "Dogs don't wear shoes, Maya." "Some do. I've seen Instagram." He couldn't argue with that. For the first 30 minutes, everything went smoothly. Luca stationed himself near the appetizer table, a strategic position he'd perfected at every social event since high school, and worked his way through an impressive array of tiny foods on tiny plates. He'd discovered that rich people had an obsession with making food microscopic, as if calories didn't count if you needed a magnifying glass to see them. He was on his 7th shrimp cocktail, they were very small shrimp, when it happened. A scent hit him like a freight train. No, like a freight train carrying a cargo of pine forests, dark chocolate, thunderstorms, and something warm and spicy that made every nerve ending in his body light up like a Christmas tree. His Omega instincts, usually about as active as a sleeping house cat, suddenly roared to life with the force of a fire alarm. "Mate, mate, mate." Luca choked on his shrimp. This was, in retrospect, the first domino in a spectacular chain of disasters. The choking led to coughing. The coughing led to flailing. The flailing led to his elbow connecting with a passing waiter's tray. The tray went up. The shrimp cocktails went sideways, and approximately 6 ounces of cocktail sauce landed directly on the shirt of Senator Richard Pemberton, who let out a sound that Luca couldn't hear but could feel in the vibrations of pure, aristocratic outrage. "Oh no," Luca said out loud, his voice carrying that particular quality that deaf speakers sometimes had. Slightly too loud, slightly off in pitch, and in this case, absolutely dripping with panic. "Oh no, oh no, oh." He grabbed the nearest cloth, which turned out to be not a napkin but the decorative sash from a nearby ice sculpture display, and began frantically dabbing at the senator's chest, which only made things worse because the sash had been dusted with edible gold glitter. The senator now looked like he'd been attacked by a cocktail sauce-wielding fairy. "Young man, young man." The senator was speaking. Luca could see his lips moving, his face cycling through shades of red that would make a sunset jealous. "I'm so sorry. I can't. I'm deaf. I can't hear you. I'm really sorry." Luca was signing and speaking simultaneously, his hands moving frantically while his mouth ran on autopilot. The senator's wife was trying to help. A security guard was approaching. Someone in the crowd was definitely filming. And through it all, that scent kept flooding Luca's senses, making it impossible to think about anything other than the fact that his fated mate was somewhere in this room and his body had chosen the absolute worst moment in human history to inform him of this fact. Then a hand landed on his shoulder. A large, warm, impossibly firm hand. And the scent intensified by about 1,000%. Luca turned around. And looked up. And up. And up. The man standing behind him was, well, tall was technically accurate in the same way that calling the ocean damp was technically accurate. He was enormous, easily 6'4", with shoulders broad enough to have their own zip code. His hair was jet black, swept back from a face that looked like it had been sculpted by an artist who'd been commissioned to create the concept of dangerous beauty. Sharp jaw, cheekbones that could cut glass, eyes so dark they were almost black, currently fixed on Luca with an intensity that made his knees go weak. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than Luca's apartment. He had a thin scar running through his left eyebrow, and he was surrounded by 4 very large, very serious-looking men in matching dark suits who were clearly bodyguards. Luca's brain, helpful as always, supplied 3 simultaneous thoughts. That's my mate. That's the most beautiful man I've ever seen. That's Dominic Castellano. Dominic Castellano, as in the host of this gala, as in the CEO of Castellano Industries, as in the man who was rumored to be the head of one of the most powerful crime families on the eastern seaboard, as in the Ruthless alpha that every tabloid, gossip column, and true crime podcast couldn't stop talking about, as in the man whose charity gala Luca had just turned into a shrimp-based crime scene. Dominic's lips were moving. He was saying something. His hand was still on Luca's shoulder, and the point of contact felt like it was burning through the fabric of the borrowed suit. "I can't hear you," Luca said, his voice coming out breathier than he intended. "I'm deaf." Dominic's expression shifted. Something flickered in those dark eyes. Surprise, then understanding, then something else entirely. Something hungry. His nostrils flared slightly, and Luca watched in real time as recognition crashed over the alpha's features like a wave. Dominic could smell it too. "Mate." The alpha's grip on his shoulder tightened. His other hand came up, and for a moment Luca thought he was going to cup his face, pull him close, do something romantic and movie-worthy. But Luca's brain had finally caught up with the situation. His mate was a mafia boss. His fated mate was a mafia boss. His fated mate was a mafia boss who was currently looking at him like he was the last glass of water in a desert. And while Luca's omega instincts were screaming yes, good, go to him, climb him like a tree, his rational mind was screaming something very different, which was, absolutely not. Luca did what any reasonable, panicking omega would do when confronted with his criminal fated mate at a fancy party where he'd just assaulted a senator with seafood. He grabbed the nearest full glass of champagne from a passing tray, looked Dominic Castellano dead in his gorgeous, terrifying eyes, and said, loudly and clearly enough for the entire ballroom to hear, "No, thank you." Then he turned on his heel and speed-walked toward the exit. Behind him, he couldn't hear the collective gasp of 300 guests. He couldn't hear the sound of Dominic Castellano's 4 bodyguards simultaneously choking on their own shock. He couldn't hear the senator's wife whisper, "Did that boy just reject Dominic Castellano?" But he could feel the vibration of the silence that fell over the room like a velvet curtain. And he could definitely feel the intensity of the gaze burning into his back as he walked. Practically ran, out of the ballroom, through the lobby, and into the mercifully cold night air. "You did what?" Maya's signs were so aggressive they were practically punches. "I rejected him," Luca signed back miserably. They were sitting on Maya's couch, Luca wrapped in a blanket burrito of shame, while Maya paced her living room like a lawyer preparing closing arguments. "Publicly. You rejected Dominic Castellano. He's a mafia boss, Maya. He's your mate. He's a mafia boss first and my mate second. That's not how biology works, Luca." "Well, it's how my decision-making works." Maya stopped pacing and stared at him with the expression of someone who loved him very much but was also seriously considering smothering him with a throw pillow. "Luca, sweetheart, light of my life, you absolute beautiful disaster of a human being." She sat down next to him and took his hands, forcing him to pay attention. "Do you understand what you've done? You publicly rejected the most powerful alpha in the city. At his own event. after dumping shrimp on a senator. The shrimp was an accident. The shrimp is the least of your problems. Luca burrowed deeper into his blanket. Maybe he'll just forget about it? Maya gave him a look that could have stripped paint. He's not going to forget, is he? He's a mafia boss who just found his fated mate and got rejected in front of 300 people. Luca. He is not going to forget about it. As if on cosmic cue, Maya's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Her eyes went wide. She turned the screen toward Luca. It was a news alert. The headline read, Mystery Omega publicly rejects Castellano heir at charity gala. Video goes viral. Oh no, Luca whispered. Maya scrolled down. There was a video. It already had 2 million views. Someone had captured the entire shrimp incident. The shoulder touch, the intense eye contact, and Luca's devastating no, thank you, from 3 different angles. The comments were extensive. Give this Omega a medal and a bodyguard. Dominic Castellano's face, I'm screaming. He looked like someone told him puppies aren't real. That Omega has the biggest courage I've ever seen. R.I.P. to a legend. Did anyone else see the way Castellano grabbed his shoulder? That's a mate recognition if I've ever seen one. This Omega rejected his fated mate. I need therapy. Luca pulled the blanket over his head. The next morning, he discovered a black Lamborghini parked outside his apartment building. Not just parked. Waiting. A large man in a suit stood beside it, holding a flat white box tied with a gold ribbon. When Luca emerged, bleary-eyed and dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt that read, I put the pro in procrastination. The suited man extended the box toward him with the solemnity of a knight presenting a sword to a king. Luca stared at it. The man said something. Luca pointed to his ears and shook his head. The man, to his credit, adapted quickly. He pulled out a phone and typed a message, then showed the screen to Luca. From Mr. Castellano. He requests the pleasure of your company for dinner. Luca looked at the box, looked at the man, looked at the Lamborghini. Then he typed on the man's phone. Tell Mr. Castellano I'm busy. Forever. I'm busy forever. He went back inside. The box, which he absolutely did not open, he opened it 3 minutes later, contained a brand new pair of top-of-the-line hearing aids, custom-molded, the exact specifications of his prescription, which meant Dominic Castellano had somehow obtained his audiological records within 12 hours of meeting him, which was either the most romantic or the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to Luca. Possibly both. He's courting you, Maya signed, practically vibrating with glee when Luca told her. An alpha mafia boss is courting you. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life. This is happening to me, not you. And yet I'm enjoying it so much more. The next day there were flowers. Not a bouquet, an installation. Luca opened his apartment door to find the entire hallway transformed into what could only be described as a botanical garden's worth of sunflowers. His favorite flower, which meant Castellano had also somehow found out his floral preferences. The day after that, a pastry chef arrived at his door with a full spread of Italian pastries and a card that read, in elegant handwriting, You left before dessert. DC. The day after that, it was a first-edition copy of Luca's favorite book, a collection of poetry by Pablo Neruda, with a handwritten note tucked inside. I do not love you as if you were a salt rose, or topaz, or the arrow of carnations the fire shoots off. Page 47 reminded me of you. Though we've only met once. I'd like to make it twice. DC. Luca absolutely did not clutch the book to his chest and make a small, involuntary sound. He did. His neighbor heard it through the wall and texted to ask if he was okay. You have to admit, Maya signed. For a ruthless crime lord, he's got game. I'm not admitting anything. You're blushing. I'm having an allergic reaction. To what? Romance. Yes. Exactly. But Luca couldn't deny that his Omega instincts were staging a full-scale revolt against his rational mind. Every gift carried traces of Dominic's scent. Pine and dark chocolate and that electric storm warmth. And every time Luca so much as touched one of the items, his inner Omega practically purred. It was infuriating. It was also, if he was being completely honest with himself, which he tried to avoid, a little bit wonderful. It took exactly 1 week for Dominic Castellano to track Luca down in person. Luca was at his favorite coffee shop, Grounds for Divorce. The owner was a bitter divorcee with an excellent sense of humor and even better espresso, working on his laptop. He was a freelance graphic designer, which meant he spent most of his time hunched over a screen in coffee shops, fueled by caffeine and the low-level anxiety that accompanied the gig economy. He was mid-sip on his third latte when the chair across from him was pulled out and a very large, very well-dressed, very familiar alpha sat down. Luca inhaled his coffee. The resulting coughing fit lasted approximately 30 seconds, during which Dominic Castellano, feared crime lord, alleged kingpin, the man tabloids called the Dark Prince of the Eastern Seaboard, calmly handed him napkins and waited with an expression of patient concern. When Luca could finally breathe again, he looked at Dominic with watering eyes and found the alpha watching him with an expression that could only be described as besotted. It was deeply unfair for a man that terrifying to look that soft. Dominic placed his phone on the table between them, screen up. A note app was open with text already typed. I learned some sign language this week. I'm not very good yet, but I wanted to try. Then he raised his hands and signed, slowly and carefully, with the determined concentration of someone defusing a bomb. Hello, my name Dominic. You are beautiful. I am. He paused, brow furrowing, and fingerspelled something that was clearly meant to be sorry, but actually signed purple. You just called yourself purple, Luca said. Dominic blinked. He looked at his hands as if they had betrayed him. Then he looked back at Luca, and the corner of his mouth twitched in something that was almost impossibly a sheepish smile. Luca's heart did something acrobatic and entirely unauthorized. I meant sorry, Dominic signed, getting it right this time. Sorry for scaring you. At the party. You didn't scare me? Luca signed back, then spoke aloud for emphasis. I wasn't scared. I was making a rational decision based on the fact that you're allegedly a crime boss. Dominic's expression flickered. He picked up the phone and typed, allegedly, is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Despite himself, Luca snorted. Dominic typed again, I run a legitimate business. The rumors are exaggerated. I've never personally threatened anyone who didn't deserve it. That's not as reassuring as you think it is. Dominic considered this, then typed, fair point. Can I buy you a coffee? I have a coffee. Can I buy you another coffee? I've had 3. Can I buy you a decaf? I'd rather die. That almost smile again. Luca was starting to realize that Dominic Castellano did not smile easily or often, and the rare glimpses of it were doing devastating things to his composure. Look, Luca said, setting down his cup and facing Dominic fully, so the alpha could see his lips and expressions clearly. I appreciate the gifts. The hearing aids were actually really amazing, and I'm trying very hard not to think about how you got my medical information. The flowers were beautiful. The pastries were incredible. The Neruda was... He stopped, because his voice was getting embarrassingly tender. The point is, I can't date a mafia boss. Dominic typed, what if I were just an extremely wealthy businessman with excellent security? Are the security guys necessary? In my line of work, yes. What line of work? Import-export. That is literally the most stereotypical mafia cover story in existence. Dominic paused, then typed, real estate? Luca actually laughed. A real, full laugh that made his nose scrunch up and his eyes crinkle. And he watched Dominic's pupils dilate in response, the alpha's entire body leaning forward like a flower toward the sun. You learned sign language in a week, Luca said quietly. For me. Dominic picked up his phone. This time he typed slowly, deliberately. I would learn anything for you. You're my mate. I knew it the moment I smelled you. You smelled like home. Like lemon trees and warm bread and the ocean in summer. I've never had a home. Not really. But I smelled one on you. Luca stared at the screen. Then he stared at Dominic. Then he said, that's the most manipulative, unfairly romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. And I need you to leave before I do something stupid. Dominic typed, like agree to have dinner with me? Exactly like that. Dominic studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, rose from the chair with the fluid grace of someone whose body was a weapon, and carefully placed a business card on the table next to Luca's laptop. He signed, "When you are ready, I will wait." Then he left, and Luca sat in the coffee shop with a cold latte, a warm face, and the absolute certainty that he was in big, big trouble. Luca lasted 4 more days before the universe decided to take matters into its own hands. He was at the grocery store, a perfectly mundane, non-romantic location, reaching for a box of cereal on the top shelf because of course his favorite cereal was always on the top shelf, because the world had a personal vendetta against people under 5'8". He was on his tiptoes, fingers brushing the box, when a much longer arm reached over him and plucked it down effortlessly. The scent hit him before he turned around. "You have got to be kidding me," Luca said. Dominic Castellano stood behind him in the cereal aisle of a suburban grocery store, wearing a black Henley that clung to his ridiculous physique, holding a box of Honey Nut Cheerios, and looking like a GQ model who'd gotten very, very lost. 2 bodyguards stood at either end of the aisle, trying to look inconspicuous among the breakfast foods. They were failing spectacularly. "Are you following me?" Luca demanded. Dominic, who had clearly been practicing, signed no. "I also need groceries." "You expect me to believe that the head of the Castellano family does his own grocery shopping?" A pause. Then Dominic signed with immense dignity, "I like to pick my own cereal." "You're ridiculous. You are beautiful. Stop saying that. It is the only sentence I can sign correctly. Give me time." Luca pressed his hands to his face to hide his smile. When he lowered them, Dominic was still there, holding out the cereal box like a peace offering, and looking at Luca with those impossibly dark eyes full of warmth and want and something achingly close to vulnerability. "One dinner," Luca said, before his brain could stop his mouth. "One. And if you're weird or scary or you do anything even remotely crime-lordish, I'm leaving and you never contact me again." Dominic's whole face transformed. The smile that broke across his features was like watching the sun come out after a storm. Blinding, beautiful, and completely unguarded. It took 10 years off his face and made him look less like a dangerous kingpin and more like a boy who'd just been told he could keep the puppy. Luca's omega instincts howled with triumph. His rational mind sighed in resignation. Dominic carefully set down the cereal and typed on his phone. "Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. I'll send a car. Dress comfortably. No Lamborghini. Promise. Send a normal car. Define normal. Not a Lamborghini. Would a Mercedes be acceptable?" "I was thinking more like a Honda." Dominic looked genuinely pained. He typed, "You're asking a lot of me. And yet here you are, buying your own Cheerios. Miracles happen." The car that arrived the next evening was, as requested, a Honda. A brand new, fully loaded Honda Accord, but still technically a Honda. Luca appreciated the compromise. He'd agonized over what to wear for an embarrassing amount of time before settling on well-fitted dark jeans. A soft blue sweater that Maya said made his eyes do that sparkly thing, and a level of nervous energy that could have powered a small city. The car took him not to a fancy restaurant, as he'd expected, but to a quiet residential address. Luca's guard went up immediately, until the door opened and Dominic appeared wearing an apron. An actual apron. It said "Kiss the Cook" in blocky letters. Luca stared at it. Stared at Dominic. Stared at the apron again. Dominic looked down at the apron, then back at Luca, and typed on his phone with one hand. "My Lieutenant Marco bought it as a joke. It was the only one I had. Please come in before my neighbors see." The ruthless alpha mafia boss was blushing. Luca walked inside, feeling like he'd stepped through a portal into an alternate dimension. The house was warm, comfortable, and, this was the shocking part, normal. Luca had expected some kind of dark villain's lair full of leather furniture and ominous lighting. Instead, there were bookshelves overflowing with novels, a well-worn couch with actual throw pillows, and a kitchen that smelled like heaven had opened a branch office in the suburbs. Dominic had cooked dinner, himself, from scratch. Homemade pasta with a slow-simmered tomato sauce, fresh bread, A salad with ingredients that looked like they'd been hand-selected by someone who cared deeply about tomato quality. There was tiramisu in the fridge that Luca could see through the glass, and it looked like it belonged in a patisserie. "You cooked?" Luca said, aware that his voice sounded stunned. Dominic signed. "My grandmother taught me. Before she—" He paused, fingerspelled a word, got it wrong, tried again. "Before she passed. She said the way to someone's heart is through food." He paused again, then added with endearing awkwardness. "Also, restaurants are hard. For lip reading. Too much noise. I thought this would be better. For you." Luca's carefully maintained defenses cracked right down the middle. He'd gone on dates with hearing people before. Most of them chose loud restaurants, forgot he couldn't hear, talked to the waiter more than to him, or treated his deafness as a novelty. Something exotic and interesting for about 20 minutes before it became an inconvenience. No one had ever thought about the acoustics. "Thank you," Luca said softly. "That's really thoughtful." Dominic's answering smile was small, private, and devastating. Dinner was a revelation. Not just because the food was extraordinary, though it was. Luca made involuntary sounds with the first bite of pasta that were frankly indecent, but because Dominic had clearly spent the entire week intensively studying sign language. He was still clumsy with it, his large hands sometimes fumbling with the more delicate motions, but he was trying. He signed when he could, typed when he couldn't, and spoke slowly and clearly when Luca watched his lips. They talked about everything. Luca learned that Dominic had taken over the family business at 22 when his father died. That the business was, and here Dominic was carefully honest, a combination of legitimate enterprises and some activities that existed in a legal gray area. That he was trying to move the family toward full legitimacy, but that the process was slow and dangerous. That he had a younger sister who was studying marine biology and who would love you. She also has no fear and terrible judgment. Luca, in turn, told Dominic about growing up deaf in a hearing family, about learning sign language from a deaf teacher who became his mentor, about his design work, about his college years, about the time he accidentally entered a hot dog eating contest because he misread the sign and thought it was a free lunch. Dominic laughed at that. Actually laughed, a deep, warm rumble that Luca couldn't hear but could feel through the table, through the floorboards, through his very bones. He felt the vibration of it and wanted to wrap himself in it like a blanket. "Can I ask you something?" Luca signed after the tiramisu, life-changing. He nearly proposed on the spot. Dominic nodded. "At the gala, when I rejected you, in front of everyone." Luca bit his lip. "What did you do? After I left?" Dominic considered the question. Then he typed. "I stood there for approximately 30 seconds while 300 people stared at me. Then my Lieutenant Marco said, 'Well, that's never happened before.' Then I went home. And then I started learning sign language." "You weren't angry?" Dominic shook his head slowly. He typed, "You were brave. You stood in front of a room full of powerful people and told one of them no. Do you know how rare that is? No one tells me no. Ever. Everyone is afraid of me." He paused. "You weren't afraid. You were magnificent. I was terrified, actually. But you did it anyway. That's what bravery is." Luca looked at this man. This supposedly ruthless, allegedly criminal, definitively enormous alpha, who had learned a new language in a week, cooked dinner from his grandmother's recipes, chosen a quiet house over a loud restaurant, and called him magnificent for telling him to get lost. "I'm going to regret this," Luca said. Dominic's eyebrows drew together in concern. Luca leaned across the table and kissed him. It was soft, brief, and tasted like coffee and tiramisu. When he pulled back, Dominic looked like someone had hit him over the head with a very pleasant baseball bat. "One date," Luca said, holding up a finger. "This was one date. I'm not agreeing to anything else. I still have serious concerns about your career choices. And I expect you to continue learning sign language." Dominic, still looking dazed, signed, "I will learn every word. Start with, I'm not a criminal." "But that would be—" Dominic paused, clearly searching for the sign. He gave up and typed, "A lie. And I don't want to lie to you. Ever." Luca groaned. "Why do you have to be so honest about the crime stuff? Can't you just gaslight me a little?" For my comfort. Dominic's lip twitched. He signed, "No. You deserve truth. I deserve a mate who doesn't have bodyguards. The bodyguards like you. Marco says you have more fumbling with signs. Typing. Unhinged energy that this family needs. I'm choosing to take that as a compliment." Epilogue. 6 months later. The video had gained 50 million views. Luca's "no, thank you" had become a meme, a reaction gif, a t-shirt slogan, and briefly a TikTok audio trend. The irony of a deaf person becoming a sound trend was not lost on him. The internet had followed the story with the obsessive dedication of a reality show audience. The shrimp incident, the public rejection, the flower installation, the grocery store sighting, and eventually, the paparazzi photo of Dominic Castellano walking out of grounds for divorce coffee shop holding hands with a honey-haired Omega, who was laughing so hard, he was doubled over while the ruthless alpha beside him carried a tray of lattes with the careful intensity of a man transporting nuclear materials. The headline read, "Ruthless Alpha Tamed. Castellano Air spotted on coffee date with the Omega who rejected him." The comments were, as always, unhinged. He looked at that Omega like he hung the moon and the stars and also personally invented coffee. "I would simply not reject my billionaire mafia boss fated mate, but I respect this Omega's commitment to chaos." Update. Someone asked Castellano about the Omega at a press conference and he said, and I quote, "He is the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend every day earning the chance he gave me. Sir, I am on the floor." Luca scrolled through the comments in bed, Dominic's arm heavy and warm around his waist. The alpha's face pressed into the back of his neck where the scent gland was, because Dominic Castellano, feared kingpin, alleged crime lord, ruthless businessman, turned into an absolute puppy when they were alone. He was a cuddler, a big spoon. He made Luca breakfast every morning and had achieved conversational fluency in sign language in 6 months. Faster than anyone Luca's deaf mentor had ever seen. "You're doing that thing again," Luca signed one-handed, not turning around but knowing from the gentle pressure and warm breath that Dominic was scenting him. A rumble against his back. Then Dominic's hand appeared over his shoulder, signing, "You smell good. You always smell good. Let me have this. You have this every morning. Not enough mornings yet. I want all of them." Luca rolled over to face him. In the morning light, Dominic looked soft, sleep-rumpled, and so far removed from the fearsome alpha the world saw that it still sometimes took Luca's breath away. "You know," Luca said, "when I threw shrimp on that senator, I really thought that was going to be the most significant event of my evening." Dominic signed. "The senator deserved it. He votes against disability rights legislation." "You researched that?" "I research everything that affects you. That's either romantic or terrifying. Why not both?" Luca kissed him because really, what else could you do with a man like that? From the kitchen, they could hear. Well, Dominic could hear, and Luca could feel the vibration through the floor. Marco's voice. "Are you two done being disgusting? I made pancakes and they're getting cold." "Your lieutenant is in our kitchen again," Luca signed. "He has a key. I've asked for it back 17 times. He said he'll give it back when you stop being, quote, so embarrassingly in love that it's affecting team morale." Dominic considered this. Then he signed with the quiet certainty that Luca had come to recognize as his most honest mode of communication. Then he will never get the key back. And despite everything, despite the absurdity of falling for a man whose idea of a normal Tuesday involved both board meetings and whatever a legitimate import-export operation actually entailed, despite the bodyguards and the tabloids and the fact that his boyfriend could probably have someone disappeared with a phone call but used that same phone to send him 17 heart emojis and a video of a puppy every single morning, Luca smiled. Because sometimes your fated mate was a 6'4" alpha with a dangerous reputation and a talent for pasta. And sometimes the bravest thing you could do wasn't saying, "No, thank you." It was saying yes. The end.